The girl in the photo is named Jin Can, a bright and promising student studying abroad in Thailand. However, just 20 days after leaving her home country, she suddenly vanished from her university campus. When she was found, she had already become a lifeless body. As the investigation progressed, a carefully orchestrated murder plot started to unravel. When the murder was finally apprehended, the appearance of a mysterious woman revealed a shocking scheme behind the crime. Nonthaburi province sits alongside the Chao Phraya River in central Thailand, just about 20 kilometers away from Bangkok. Once known for its beautiful landscapes and magnificent temples, this area is the backdrop of today's story, which begins at Chuyak Temple. On the morning of April 1st, 2023, an elderly man riding his motorcycle past Chuyak Temple was struck by a strong, foul odor from the roadside. Curious, he followed the smell and was shocked to discover the body of a woman in a nearby drainage ditch. The sight sent him into a panic, and he immediately called the police. When the Nonthaburi police arrived at the scene, they found the woman's body tied up and stuffed inside a plastic bag. Her neck was wrapped in a towel, and she had multiple stab wounds and marks suggesting she had been beaten and strangled. The state of the body indicated that she was likely an Asian woman in her 20s who had been killed around 3 days prior. As authorities wondered about her identity, one of the officers suddenly recalled that a report had come in just the day before from Thonburi University. A female international student had been kidnapped, and she was believed to be from China. The student was still missing. With this new lead, the officers immediately reached out to the university. After further confirmation with school officials, it was revealed that the body belonged to Jin Can, a third-year music student from Thonburi University. Thonburi University is a comprehensive private institution approved by the Thai Ministry of Education and has partnerships with over 10 Chinese universities. Its music program is one of the university's standout departments, enjoying an international reputation. Due to the pandemic, the school had held online classes for the past 2 years, and it wasn't until March 8, 2023, that Jin Can travel to Thailand to attend in-person classes after the school resumed on-campus teaching. For over 20 days, Jin Can experienced a peaceful campus life in Thailand. However, on March 31st, everything changed when her father reached out to one of the school's teachers, stating that his daughter had been kidnapped. The abductors were demanding a ransom of 500,000 yuan, and despite his attempts to communicate with them, there had been no further contact. Desperate for information and assistance, he sought the school's help in locating his daughter. The teacher responsible for Chinese international students quickly confirmed Jin Can's disappearance and reported it to the local police. Thai authorities, along with immigration and related departments, launched an investigation. Shockingly, it was just the next day that the university received news from the police confirming the discovery of Jin Can's body, turning the case from a kidnapping to a murder. But how did she meet such a tragic fate? After confirming that the deceased was Jin Can, the Thai police began their investigation by reviewing the university's surveillance footage. The last time Jin Can was seen on campus was at 12:54 p.m. on March 28th, after which she did not appear again. The police then checked the area surrounding the school and discovered that around 6:40 p.m. that same evening, Jin Can had gone to a nearby restaurant for dinner. Later, at 8 p.m., she took a taxi to Central Westgate Shopping Mall, where she spent about half an hour in a mobile phone shop. Upon leaving the store, she was picked up by a red Mazda sedan, which drove her to a townhouse in Nonthaburi province. The townhouse was just about 2 kilometers away from where her body was eventually found. Based on this information, the police suspected that Jin Can had been killed there, and the person who drove the sedan to the townhouse was a prime suspect. The police conducted further investigations and contacted both the car owner and the townhouse landlord. It turned out that the Mazda belonged to a Chinese man who, as it seemed, had no direct involvement in the case. On March 20th, 3 fellow Chinese nationals had rented the car from him for 10 days, agreeing to return it by March 30th at a daily rate of over 400 yuan. However, They had returned the car early on March 29th after thoroughly cleaning it. Similarly, the townhouse had also been rented out on March 20th to a Thai woman who rented it for a month but reached out to the landlord just 9 days later to terminate the lease. Based on their testimonies, the police identified at least 4 suspects. After analyzing the surveillance footage near the townhouse, they narrowed it down to 3 Chinese individuals, Zhou Pengfei, Zhou Xiongfei, and Chen Saikong, who were all from Xingtai, Hebei Province, China. However, when the authorities tried to detain them for questioning, they found that the suspects had already fled to China on a Sichuan Airlines flight on March 30th. The Thai police immediately contacted their Chinese counterparts for assistance. On April 3rd, under the directive of the Ministry of Public Security and the Hebei Police, the 3 suspects were apprehended in Xiangyang, Hubei Province, and placed under criminal detention. On the same day, a Thai woman voluntarily surrendered at Thonburi Police Station, claiming that she was also involved in the kidnapping. With her testimony, the police began to piece together the details of the case. Surprisingly, it was revealed that the 3 suspects were already acquainted with Jin Can, and one of them was actually her boyfriend. But how did things escalate to this point? Jin Can was born in July 2002 in Songnan County, Wenzhou, Zhejiang Province, China. From elementary school through high school, she studied in her hometown of Qingku Town. Jin Can was outgoing and optimistic, and she loved to share snippets of her life on social media. Like many girls her age, she was into cute pets, makeup, music, and good food. But if there was one hobby she was especially passionate about, it was getting her hair done. Every now and then, she'd head to a friend's salon for a new style, and of the 106 posts she made on her social media, most of them showed off her latest hairdos. As a young girl in the bloom of youth, Jin Can longed for a sweet romance. She had dated a boy before, but he had a bad temper, often berated her, and constantly asked to borrow money. Eventually, their relationship ended on a sour note. In September 2022, Jin Can met Zhou Pengfei online. Zhou worked as a hairstylist and had quite a knack for designing hair. After adding each other as friends, they hit it off right away. They often chatted online, and with his high emotional intelligence, Zhou Pengfei knew just how to make a girl laugh. Jin Can found herself drawn to him and enjoyed their conversations. Before long, they became quite close. Zhou Pengfei also learned more about Jin Can's family background, realizing that her parents were both music teachers and fairly well off. One day, Jin Can told Zhou about her plans to study abroad in Thailand. To her surprise, he responded by saying, "When you go to Thailand to study, I'll come with you," even imagining the happy life they could have there together. His honeyed words made Jin Can's heart flutter. She was so thrilled by his declaration that she shared the news with her friend, Wang Si. But Wang Si was quick to caution her, saying, "He's just sweet-talking you. It's probably all lies." Hearing this, Jin Can manage to rein in her excitement and start to see things a bit more clearly. But it turned out Zhou Pengfei wasn't just making empty promises. He really did plan to go to Thailand. However, his intentions were far from pure. Upon hearing about Jin Can's study plans, Zhou began to hatch a sinister plot. He saw her trip as the perfect opportunity for kidnapping and extortion. Knowing that Jin Can had rarely left her hometown and had never been far from her family, he thought that once she was alone in a foreign country, she would be lonely and vulnerable. If he showed up to support her, it would be easy to win her over. Controlling this girl, he figured, would be a piece of cake. So, he reached out to his friend, Chen Saikong, and his brother, Zhou Xiongfei, and together they formed a plan for a cross-border kidnapping and ransom scheme. Zhou Xiongfei and Zhou Pengfei were childhood friends from the same village, having grown up together. Chen Saikong was their middle school classmate, living just 5 kilometers away. Chen had a reputation for being a troublemaker from a young age, often skipping school and getting into fights. During middle school, he became quite notorious around the school area, eventually dropping out to work as a hairstylist. Before the crime, he had also earned some illicit money through money laundering schemes. The three easily found common ground and formed a twisted plan. Lure Jin Can into a fake romance and use her to extort money from her family. 10 days after Jin Can's arrival in Thailand, Zhou Pengfei, Zhou Xiongfei, and Chun Saikong also made their way to the country. On their first day, they met a 19-year-old Thai female worker at a karaoke bar in Bangkok. Promising her a payment of 50,000 baht, they persuaded her to help arrange their accommodations and transportation in Thailand. With her assistance, the three rented a townhouse in Nonthaburi province and secured a Mazda car. For several days, they frequented the karaoke bar, getting closer to the Thai worker. Chun Saikong even flirted with her, eventually inviting her to join their criminal plot. Seeing an opportunity, she agreed to help, and even began to scout out other potential targets for extortion. Before targeting Jin Can, the trio had attempted to harm another Chinese woman. A witness living in the same townhouse complex in Nonthaburi recalled seeing a Chinese girl loitering in front of the suspect's residence. At that time, the girl had parked her car in front of the witness's house, obstructing access. The witness spoke to her and asked her to move her vehicle. During their conversation, the woman revealed that she was there to see Zhou Pengfei and his friends, but since they weren't home, she waited for a while and eventually left. Luckily, she narrowly escaped danger. Jin Can, however, was not so fortunate. On March 28th, Zhou Pengfei suddenly reached out to Jin Can, claiming that he and his friends were in Thailand and were eager to meet her. Jin Can was thrilled. She had once thought, based on a friend's advice, that Zhou was merely making empty promises about visiting. Yet here he was, actually following through. They agreed to meet at a department store in Nonthaburi. Around 8:30 p.m., Jin Can was picked up by Zhou and the others. As soon as she got in the car, before she even had a chance to say much, a cloth was forced into her mouth. The once gentle and caring boyfriend she had met online instantly transformed into a ruthless kidnapper. They drove her to the townhouse, where they tied her to a chair and took photos of her to use for ransom demands. Since Jin Can knew their faces and other identifying information, letting her live was never part of the plan. Even if they got the ransom, the trio knew they couldn't spend the money freely back in China if she were alive. From the very start, they intended to silence her permanently. That night, they didn't have her send any ransom messages to her family. Instead, they tortured her repeatedly, forcing her to reveal her phone passcode and other important passwords, including for WeChat. This way, even after Jin Can's death, they could pretend she was still alive. Seeing Jin Can in such a vulnerable state, Zhou Pengfei and his accomplices were overcome with twisted thoughts and decided to assault her. Jin Can fiercely resisted their advances, but in a fit of anger and lust, the three men unleashed a torrent of brutal violence on her. The forensic examination of her body revealed that not only was she severely beaten, but she was also repeatedly slashed with a sharp object. However, the autopsy showed that the actual cause of death was asphyxiation, underscoring the sheer cruelty and ruthlessness of her captors, who left her no chance of survival. In the early hours of March 29th, around 1:30 a.m., the Thai woman involved in the crime suggested to the trio that they dispose of Jin Can's body. Following her advice, Chun Saikong, Zhou Pengfei, and Zhou Xiongfei used a red Mazda to transport the bag containing Jin Can's body, eventually dumping it in a ditch near the temple. That same afternoon, at around 3 p.m., they thoroughly cleaned the rented car before returning it to the owner. Afterward, the Thai woman went to the townhouse landlord and terminated the lease. On March 30th, the three suspects boarded a flight back to China, embarking on the run. At this point, Jin Can's family was completely in the dark, believing their daughter was safe. They couldn't have predicted that the next morning would mark the start of a nightmare. Around 11 a.m. on March 31st, Jin Can's father suddenly received a message from her on WeChat, and he eagerly opened it, hoping to hear from his daughter. But what he saw felt like a bolt of lightning. an image of his daughter bound and gagged, accompanied by a demand for 500,000 yuan, about 70,000 US dollars, to be transferred to a Chinese bank account within 3 hours. In a panic, Jin Can's father tried to call back, both through voice and video, to confirm the situation. Each time, the calls were either declined or went unanswered. Unable to reach the suspects, he immediately contacted the Chinese police and notified the authorities at Thonburi University in Thailand. This set the stage for the events that unfolded at the start of the story. On April 1st, Jin Can was found, her body cold and lifeless. Regarding the ransom messages, some media in Thailand mistakenly reported that Jin Can's parents had received the message on March 29th and failed to transfer the money in time, leading to her death. However, this was not the case. On March 29th and 30th, there were no messages about a kidnapping in Jin Can's family chat. Although they were puzzled about why their daughter wasn't making video calls, they had no reason to suspect that she was already in grave danger. It wasn't until March 31st that they were suddenly contacted by the suspects. Even then, despite a gnawing sense of dread, they clung to hope, praying their daughter was still alive. If the kidnappers were after money, then once the ransom was paid, Jin Can should have been safe, right? At least, that's what her mother clung to, hope that her daughter would come back. Tragically, just a few days later, they received devastating news. The kidnappers had killed Jin Can before they even demanded a ransom. The life of this young woman ended at just 20 years old, and she would never return home to her parents again. The piano she left behind at home would remain silent, its beautiful melodies gone forever. Upon hearing the news, Jin Can's mother fell into complete despair, shutting herself away for days. Her grandmother, overwhelmed with grief, became bedridden. To make matters worse, false rumors spread online claiming that the kidnappers murdered Jin Can because the family failed to pay the ransom, an accusation that inflicted even more pain on the family during their darkest hour. On April 3rd, after days on the run, Zhou Pengfei and his accomplices were apprehended. Following discussions between China and Thailand, both parties agreed that the suspects could be prosecuted by Chinese authorities, making extradition to Thailand unnecessary. Meanwhile, upon hearing the final confirmation of their daughter's death, Jin Can's parents immediately traveled to Thailand to bring her body home. On April 4th, 2023, Jin Can's father and other family members arrived in Thailand. With the support of staff from the Chinese embassy, they were briefed on the details of the case and cooperated with the local police to give statements. The following morning, the family went to the local hospital to identify Jin Can's body and obtain her death certificate. Afterward, the body was transferred to a nearby temple. Jin Can's father also visited her school to collect her belongings. He was visibly distraught, weakened to the point that he needed help just to walk. And yet, despite his own fragile state, he still took his daughter's photo to Bangkok's Grand Palace, wanting her to see the Thai site she never had the chance to visit. On the same day, the Wenzhou Public Security Bureau released a police briefing confirming that Zhou Pengfei and the other two suspects had indeed kidnapped and murdered Jin Can and were in custody. The statement also mentioned that the case was under further investigation. In the wake of this, numerous media outlets scrambled to cover updates on the case, and the identities of the three suspects gradually surfaced. On April 7th, Jin Can's family received news from the Chinese embassy in Thailand that, due to investigative needs, the Chinese police had requested that the body be transported back to China. The family then began processing the necessary documentation for repatriation. On April 9th, the embassy released a public notice regarding the case, stating that they would closely monitor and follow up on developments. On April 12th, Jin Can's remains arrived in Shanghai and were immediately transferred to Wenzhou police for further investigation. However, the case soon fell into silence after the repatriation of the body, with no additional media coverage or updates to follow. The most recent report that can be found about the case dates back to April 13th, 2023, which stated that the case was still under investigation. A representative from the Wenzhou Public Security Bureau remarked that information would be disclosed to the public in due time as the investigation progressed. However, to this day, the Bureau has not released any new updates, and no details are available on China's legal document platform. Moreover, since the embassy's last statement on April 9, 2023, they have not provided any further information, suggesting that there may still be unresolved controversies and that certain aspects of the case remain confidential. As for how far the investigation has gone and what kind of verdict will be handed down to Zhou Pengfei, his accomplices, and the Thai female co-conspirator, we will have to wait and see. Jin Can is gone forever, but the perpetrators have yet to receive their deserved punishment. Her parents, along with millions of concerned citizens following this case, are still waiting for a just and fair judgment.